It was a Saturday afternoon when I found the papers. I remember the moment so clearly, as though it happened yesterday. The house was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The kind of silence that fills a home when everyone is out or when no one has the energy to fill the space with noise. I had just returned from a short walk in the park, trying to clear my head. The past few weeks had been a blur of hospital visits, stress, and that gnawing feeling of helplessness that comes with watching someone you love slowly slip away. Dad's illness had been a long battle. The kind of illness that strips away a person piece by piece, leaving nothing but the faint traces of who they used to be. I had seen him at his best, strong and full of life, before the disease took hold of him. But now I was watching him in his final days, reduced to a shadow of his former self. My sister, Emily, and I had been doing what we could to care for him, but the weight of the responsibility was falling mostly on me. I had always been the more reliable of the two of us. Emily, despite being older, had never been particularly good at handling responsibility. She had always been the carefree one, the one who could charm anyone into doing what she wanted. I had assumed that the end was near. The doctors had said as much. So, when I found myself in Dad's study that afternoon, searching for some important documents he had mentioned, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I had been in that room countless times before, sorting through papers, helping him with bills, and organizing his things. But that day, as I sifted through the stack of papers on his desk, I found something that would change everything. It was a thick envelope, neatly tucked between some other files. It wasn't like the usual paperwork, which was always a mess of medical bills, insurance claims, and financial statements. This envelope was crisp, its edges sharp, and there was no return address. No one had mentioned anything about a new document. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should even look. But curiosity got the best of me. I pulled it out and opened it, finding a set of legal documents inside. The first thing I noticed was the heading, Trust Fund Agreement. My stomach lurched. I had heard Dad mention a trust fund before, but he had never explained it in detail. It was always something that was in place for the future. A safety net, he'd called it, but it had never seemed particularly important to me. We were a close family, and I had always thought that we would be taken care of together. The words on the paper were more than just a financial arrangement. They felt like a cold slap in the face. As I scanned the document, my heart began to race. The trust fund was being established for Emily, and Emily alone. My name was nowhere to be found. The document outlined how the trust would function, the assets it would contain, and the conditions under which Emily could access it. The amounts involved were staggering, millions of dollars. It seemed absurd considering how Dad had always told us that money wasn't everything. But now it was clear that this trust was designed to ensure Emily's future, with no mention of any provision for me. I sat down at Dad's desk, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me. My mind raced. How could he have done this? How could he have created this massive financial cushion for Emily and not even mentioned it to me? I had always worked hard, always been the dependable one, and yet here I was being excluded from something that would impact both our futures. It felt like a betrayal, and the more I thought about it, the more my anger grew. How could my father think that Emily, someone who had always been spoiled and never truly understood the value of hard work, deserved all of this? And what did this mean for me? What had I missed? Was there something I didn't understand about the situation? I felt a deep, gnawing sadness in my chest, and I realized that I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. The trust fund was not just about money. It was about security, a future that had been promised to us, and now it felt like that promise had been broken. I hadn't expected to be treated exactly the same as Emily, but I never imagined that Dad would make such a glaringly obvious distinction between us. I tried to make sense of it. Perhaps Dad had his reasons. Maybe he thought Emily needed more help than I did. She had always been the more carefree, less responsible one. She'd never held down a job for long, always floating from one thing to the next. I, on the other hand, had worked hard, built my career from the ground up, and had been responsible for many things in our family. Still, it didn't sit right with me. I was left to wonder if my father had seen me as strong enough to go without such support, or if he had simply chosen to favor Emily in a way that felt unfair. I needed answers, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him just yet. He was frail, weak, and I didn't want to add any more stress to an already difficult time. But I couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. I kept staring at the papers in my hands, my mind swirling with questions. Was I going to have to fight for what was rightfully mine? Or had I already been written out of the picture? And if that was the case, what would this mean for my future? For our relationship as siblings? The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I found myself avoiding Emily more than usual. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, and the thought of confronting her about the trust fund only made me more anxious. I didn't know how to bring it up. Would she even care? Or would she brush it off, as she always did when things didn't go her way? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that confronting her was not going to be easy. But I also knew that I couldn't let this go. Something had to be done. I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I had always been the responsible one, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly, but now I felt like a fool. I had trusted my father, and he had left me in the dark. I didn't want to lash out in anger, but the pain was still there, sharp and raw. I wasn't sure how to move forward, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go without addressing it. I had to confront my father's choices, and eventually I would have to confront Emily too. The discovery of the trust fund changed everything for me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the realization that my father's love and support had never been as unconditional as I thought. It was about facing the truth that, in his eyes, Emily was the one who needed protecting. And now I was left to wonder if I had been forgotten altogether. As I walked out of Dad's study that day, the weight of the discovery still heavy in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had shifted. Things would never be the same again. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let my father's choices define my relationship with Emily, or with anyone for that matter. I was going to find my own path, even if it meant standing up for myself in ways I had never done before. The days following the discovery of the trust fund were difficult. The weight of the knowledge I had uncovered pressed on me, and I found myself unable to focus on much else. The trust fund was not just a financial matter. It had opened up a flood of emotions I had been ignoring for years. It wasn't just about the money. It was about how my father had always treated me and Emily differently. I had always known that Emily and I had a somewhat strained relationship, but I had never imagined that it ran this deep. I had always thought that the three of us, Dad, Emily, and I, shared a bond, even though we sometimes saw things differently. But now it felt as if that bond had been shattered, like a delicate thread that had finally snapped under pressure. As I sat in my apartment, staring out the window, I couldn't help but reflect on the past. Growing up, Emily had always been the one who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. She was the one who got away with things I could never have gotten away with. It wasn't that she was intentionally malicious, but she had a way of charming everyone around her, including our father. I used to get frustrated when people would tell me that Emily was just a free spirit, as if it were some kind of excuse for her behavior. I had been the responsible one, always trying to keep things together, to make sure everything was in order. But Emily was the one who could smile, bat her lashes, and get people to give her what she wanted without lifting a finger. I tried to avoid thinking about it, but the memories came flooding back. I remembered how, when we were kids, Emily always seemed to get the nicer things. She had the newest clothes, the latest gadgets, and she never had to work for anything. Dad had always been indulgent with her. I, on the other hand, had to work for everything I had. I had worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college, something Emily had never done. Even when it came to grades, I was the one who had to put in extra effort, while Emily seemed to coast by. It was as if she had this natural ability to charm her way through life, while I had to constantly fight to prove myself. Over the years, I had learned to accept that our family dynamic was just different. I tried not to hold it against Emily. She wasn't a bad person. She just didn't understand the value of hard work. She didn't appreciate what it took to get ahead in life. And because of that, she had never learned the lessons I had. She took things for granted, and I had become the one who picked up the slack, the one who always made sure things got done, whether it was taking care of family matters or helping Emily out when she needed it. I had always been there for her, even when it felt like I was doing all the work. But now, with the discovery of the trust fund, it was clear that my father had never truly seen me the way I had hoped he would. I had always tried to be patient with Emily. I tried to understand that she had a different way of approaching life. I had always assumed that one day she would mature, that one day she would learn to appreciate the things I had worked so hard for. But as I thought about it, I realized that I had been fooling myself. Emily had never shown any desire to change. She had always expected things to be handed to her, and Dad had always indulged her. I knew that this was the root of the problem, but I couldn't figure out how to address it. I didn't want to start a fight, but I also couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Something had to change. As the days passed, Emily's behavior only reinforced my growing frustration. She wasn't outwardly malicious, but she was still the same person she had always been. She would call me up asking for favors, assuming that I would drop everything to help her. One afternoon, she asked me to pick up some documents for her from the bank. "I have a meeting and I can't make it," she said with that familiar, sweet tone that always got under my skin. "Can you do it for me?" It wasn't the favor itself that bothered me. It was the assumption that I would do it without question, as if my time meant less than hers. I found myself saying yes, as I always did, but the moment I hung up the phone, I felt a pang of resentment. Why did I always have to be the one to help? Why was I always the one who had to carry the weight? It felt as though Emily was oblivious to the fact that I had my own life, my own responsibilities. She was the type to ask for help, but rarely offered any in return. It wasn't just the favors, either. It was the way she carried herself, as if the world owed her something. The more I reflected on this, the more the resentment grew. And then, one evening, the truth hit me. Emily was never going to change. She was never going to learn the lessons I had learned. She was never going to understand what it took to survive in the real world. And my father, in his infinite indulgence, had made sure of it. He had given her a safety net, a trust fund that would protect her from the consequences of her own actions. I couldn't help but feel angry. Angry at my father for enabling Emily's behavior, angry at Emily for never taking responsibility, and angry at myself for putting up with it all these years. I had been the one to take care of things, to hold everything together, while Emily had floated through life without a care in the world. And now, my father's decision to leave everything to Emily, while I was left out in the cold, seemed like the final straw. That night, I sat down with a glass of wine and thought long and hard about what to do. I realized that I couldn't continue enabling this dynamic. I couldn't keep doing everything for Emily, couldn't keep allowing her to take advantage of me. It was time to draw a line in the sand. I had spent too many years being the reliable, responsible one, the one who always came through for the family. But now it was time to stop. I had been given no real support from my father, and I wasn't going to continue supporting Emily without any acknowledgement of the strain it caused me. The next few days were tense. I avoided Emily as much as possible, and when we did speak, I was short with her. I tried to keep the conversations minimal, but she seemed to sense that something was off. She would ask if I was okay, but I could tell she wasn't genuinely concerned. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was more that she assumed everything would always be fine. She always assumed that things would work out, and I was always there to make sure they did. Finally, one evening, she confronted me. She came over to my apartment, a look of concern on her face. "You've been distant lately," she said. "What's going on?" I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how I felt, to let her know how hurt I was by the trust fund and how I felt that I had been left behind. But instead, I took a deep breath and told her the truth as calmly as I could manage. "I'm not happy with the way things have been between us," I said. "I've always been there for you, Emily, but I can't keep doing this. You can't keep expecting me to drop everything for you. I have my own life, my own responsibilities. And frankly, I don't think you understand what that means. You've always had everything handed to you. I've always been the one to pick up the slack, and I'm tired of it." She looked at me, stunned. "What do you mean? I don't ask for much." "No, you don't. But you always assume that I'll be there to clean up your mess. I've been doing it for years, and I can't do it anymore. Not when Dad left everything to you." Her face faltered. She didn't say anything for a long time, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than usual. Is this because of the trust fund? I nodded. Yes, it is. It's not just about the money. It's about the fact that Dad never saw me the way he saw you. And it's about how you've always taken advantage of that. There was a long silence before she finally spoke again. I didn't know, about the trust fund. I didn't ask for it. I didn't know how to respond. I could see that Emily was genuinely surprised, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that she had been given everything while I had to work for what I had. It didn't feel fair, and as much as I cared about her, I realized that I had to stop enabling her. I had to stop letting her think that she could take and take without giving anything back. I know you didn't ask for it, I said, my voice softening, but it doesn't change the fact that it's there. And it doesn't change the fact that I've been left out in the cold. Emily looked down, clearly uncomfortable, but I could tell she was beginning to understand. At least, I hope she was. We didn't talk much after that night, but I knew things between us had shifted. It wasn't the end of our relationship, but it was the beginning of a change. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for her. It was time for me to stand up for myself, to stop being the one who always picked up the pieces. Things would be different from now on. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The days after our conversation were quiet, almost too quiet. I had done what I thought was necessary. Spoke up, said my piece, let Emily know that things couldn't continue the way they had. It wasn't as though I expected her to immediately understand everything, but I hoped she would take the words to heart, that she would begin to see things from my perspective. But as the silence stretched between us, I started to question whether I had done the right thing at all. Was I being too harsh? Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe, just maybe, I had taken something personal that was never meant to be personal. I thought about Emily often during that time, wondering how she was processing our conversation. In some ways, I had been prepared for an argument, but her quiet response had left me feeling unsure. It felt like I had thrown a rock into a pond, and now, all I could do was wait for the ripples to settle. Emily wasn't the kind of person who handled confrontation well. She would either shut down or lash out, and I wasn't sure which one would happen. I had always been the one to hold things together, the one to keep the peace, but this time, the peace felt elusive. It was only a few days later when the phone rang. I wasn't expecting it to be Emily. After our conversation, I had assumed she would need some space. But when I saw her name on the caller ID, I took a deep breath before answering. I had no idea what she would say. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "Can we talk?" I could hear the hesitation in her tone, and I knew that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I had braced myself for an argument, but instead, she sounded almost uncertain. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's on your mind?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I waited, wondering if she was going to speak at all, but when she finally did, her words caught me off guard. "I've been thinking about what you said," Emily said, "and I think I might have been a little selfish." I blinked, shocked. I didn't expect her to say that. Emily had never been one to admit fault easily. "Selfish?" I echoed, trying to process her words. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've always just assumed that you'd be there to take care of things for me," she said slowly. "I never really thought about how much it might be weighing on you. I guess I've just always thought that things would work out, and you'd make them work out for me." Her words were like a punch to the gut. For years, I had watched her do exactly that. Expect everything to fall into place without ever truly considering the effort it took to make it happen. She had always been able to ask, to demand, and I would give, no questions asked. But now, hearing her admit that she recognized the weight I had been carrying, it hit me harder than I had anticipated. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "It's not just about you asking for help, Emily," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It's about the fact that I've been doing this for so long, without ever getting anything in return. I've been the one who picked up the pieces, made sure everything ran smoothly, while you just coasted through." There was another long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of Emily exhaling, like she was trying to process what I had said. "I didn't realize it was like that for you," she finally said, her voice quieter now. "I really didn't." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. I had spent so many years trying to make things work between us, trying to be the understanding sibling, the one who always put the family first. But now, as the reality of our situation set in, I couldn't ignore the bitterness that had been building inside me. Was this really enough? Was her apology genuine, or was it just another way to get me to fix things for her? Do you get it now? I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Do you understand why I've had enough? Why I can't just keep going along with it? There was a long pause before she answered. I understand, she said softly. I really do. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to say something reassuring, to tell her that everything was okay, that we could move forward from this. But another part of me, the part that had been silently carrying the weight for so long, didn't know if I could forgive her that easily. It wasn't just about the trust fund. It was about the years of me putting my needs and feelings aside for the sake of her comfort. I wasn't sure if I was ready to just let that go. I don't know if things could just go back to how they were, I said slowly. I need space to figure this out, Emily. I need to figure out what I want from this, from us. I get it, she replied quietly. Take all the time you need. I won't push. That was the last thing she said before we hung up. I stared at the phone for a few moments, unsure of what to feel. On one hand, I was relieved to hear that she was at least acknowledging the things I'd been carrying for so long. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't enough, that one conversation couldn't undo the years of resentment, of feeling like I was constantly in her shadow, always cleaning up her mess. In the days that followed, I withdrew further. I kept to myself, focused on work, and avoided any unnecessary contact with Emily. I wasn't sure how to handle things between us. I wanted to believe that our relationship could improve, but the truth was I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to being the person I was before all of this. I didn't know if I could just forgive and forget. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The streets were quiet, the sky overcast with clouds that promised rain. It was one of those days where everything felt heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I walked aimlessly, not really paying attention to where I was going, just needing the movement to distract me from the swirling thoughts in my head. Eventually, I found myself in a park near the river, a place where I had spent a lot of time growing up. The sound of the water flowing, the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was soothing, and I sat down on a bench by the water, letting myself take a few deep breaths. It was here, in the quiet, that I realized something important. I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I couldn't keep carrying the burden of resentment toward Emily. As much as I had every right to be angry, I also had to let go of that anger if I wanted to move forward. It wasn't easy to come to that conclusion. Letting go of resentment meant accepting that things had been unfair, that my father had made choices that hurt me, and that Emily had never truly understood the depth of what I'd been doing for her. But it also meant accepting that, in the end, Emily was still my sister, and I didn't want to lose that connection forever. I returned home that afternoon with a renewed sense of clarity. I still didn't know exactly what the future held for Emily and me, but I knew I couldn't keep punishing her for the mistakes of the past. I couldn't keep holding her responsible for things that were beyond her control. Later that evening, I called her. This time, I didn't feel the weight of all those years of resentment on my shoulders. Instead, I felt a kind of peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hey, it's me, I said when she picked up. I've been thinking about everything, and I think it's time we have an honest conversation. I'm ready, Emily replied, her voice steady but soft. I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and things wouldn't change overnight, but we had taken the first step. We were beginning to rebuild piece by piece, and that, I realized, was enough for now. The days after my conversation with Emily felt strangely calm. After all the tension that had filled our lives for so long, it seemed almost surreal to have a quiet peace settle in. The truth was, I had no idea how to move forward, not really. I had done my part in confronting the years of silence and resentment, and now it was up to Emily and me to figure out what came next. It wasn't going to be an easy road, but somehow, for the first time in years, I felt hopeful that we could navigate it. It was as though, finally, we both understood the weight we had been carrying, and that was the first step toward changing the dynamic that had kept us both stuck. That first evening after our conversation, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with 100 different thoughts. It was clear to me now that everything had changed. My father's death, the trust fund, my relationship with Emily. It was all intertwined in a way I had never truly understood until now. And yet, it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the family, the legacy we carried, the expectations that had been placed on us, and the decisions we had made along the way. It was the next morning when Emily called again. It was early, much earlier than I expected, and I almost didn't answer. But something inside me told me that this call was important. I had been dreading this moment, the point where everything we had discussed would have to become real. I couldn't avoid it forever, and the longer I put it off, the more complicated things might get. So I answered. "Hey," she said, her voice sounding strangely small. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I want to apologize again. I don't know if I've really said it enough, but I'm really sorry for everything. For taking advantage of you, for never seeing how hard you've worked. I've been selfish, and I didn't even realize it until now." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but it wasn't enough to wash away the years of frustration. At least, not yet. I didn't want to dismiss her apology, but I knew that this wasn't just about words. It was about actions. I wanted to believe her, but there was a part of me that couldn't just forget what had happened. And more importantly, there was a part of me that was still angry. I had spent so many years taking care of everything, putting my own needs aside for her, and I couldn't simply brush that aside because of a phone call and some heartfelt words. "I hear you, Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But it's not just about saying sorry. It's about changing how we interact, how we treat each other. I don't think we can just go back to what it was before." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, and I knew she was processing what I was saying. "I know," she said finally, "and I don't expect things to go back to how they were. But I want to try, if you're willing to." The words stung, but not in the way I expected. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to make sure everything was okay. Now, Emily was the one offering the olive branch. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it wasn't going to fix everything, but it was a start. "I'm willing to try," I replied quietly. "But it's going to take time. I'm not sure how we're going to get there, but we have to start somewhere." After that, there was an unspoken understanding between us. Neither of us knew exactly what would come next, but we both knew that we were standing at a crossroads. The trust fund, the years of miscommunication, the silent expectations that had hung over our heads like a cloud, all of it had brought us to this point. And now, it was up to us to decide how we would move forward. Over the following weeks, Emily and I began to rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. It felt like walking on fragile ground, as though we were both unsure of how much weight the other could bear. But slowly, we started talking more honestly. We shared our frustrations, our disappointments, and our hopes for the future. I began to see a side of Emily that I had never noticed before, the side that was vulnerable, uncertain, and capable of growth. For the first time, she wasn't the entitled, carefree person I had grown up with. She was someone who was trying, truly trying, to make things right. Still, there were moments of tension. Old habits died hard, and sometimes I would find myself slipping into my old role as the responsible one, the one who took care of everything. Emily, in turn, would sometimes fall back into the pattern of assuming I would take care of things for her. But each time it happened, we called each other out on it. There were awkward conversations, moments of discomfort, but they were necessary. Each time we confronted our old behaviors, we made progress. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, I sat down on the couch with a glass of wine. Emily called me about an hour later, and when I picked up, I could hear the excitement in her voice. "I did it," she said, practically bubbling with energy. "I've been working on this project for weeks now, and I finally finished it. I'm so proud of myself." I smiled, a real, genuine smile that felt unfamiliar but comforting. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud of her, not because she was my sister, but because she had worked for something and achieved it on her own. "That's amazing, Emily," I said. "You should be proud. I'm really happy for you." Her voice softened. "I know I've been a pain, but I want you to know that I appreciate you. I've been thinking a lot about everything, And I realized that I've been so focused on myself and what I could get that I didn't see how much you've been giving. And I don't want to keep taking from you anymore. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I knew Emily had said she was sorry before, but hearing her say this, hearing her finally understand the depth of my sacrifice, it meant more than I could put into words. I'm proud of you, Emily. Really. I just want you to keep moving forward like this on your own. I want you to keep doing things for yourself. There was a pause before she spoke again. I will. I'm going to make it right, I promise. We talked for a while longer, and when we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't that everything was fixed, not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. Maybe things wouldn't be perfect. Maybe Emily would still need help from time to time, and maybe I would still be there for her in moments when she needed me. But the difference was that she was starting to understand. She was starting to realize that I wasn't just there to clean up after her or to fix things for her. I was her sister, and I deserved the same respect and consideration she would give anyone else in her life. A few months later, the weight of my father's death had finally begun to feel less heavy. The trust fund, while still a reminder of the way he had chosen to divide his wealth, no longer had the same sting. Emily and I had found a way to navigate it. She had worked hard to prove that she was capable, and I had learned to let go of the need to fix everything for her. In a way, I felt like I had finally found my own freedom in this. I didn't have to be the one who carried the burden anymore. I didn't have to be the one who always made sure everything was okay. And in doing so, I had started to live my own life again, not just in the shadow of family obligations. One evening, Emily and I sat down together at a cafe to talk, and as we did, I realized something important. We weren't just sisters. We were two individuals, each with our own lives, our own choices, and our own paths. But what mattered was that we were choosing to walk those paths together as equals. I think we're doing okay, I said, looking up at her with a smile. Emily nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. Yeah, we really are. And just like that, I knew that despite everything we had been through, despite the years of resentment, the misunderstandings, and the mistakes, we were finally on the same page. It wasn't perfect, and it might never be, but it was enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future was something we could both face with hope.